The mythical figure of Myrdin, or Merlin, who was associated with the King Arthur legend, was linked with a cave in Cornwall, but was he ever actually here? The cave is at the foot of the headland in northern Cornwall that contains the ruins of Tintagel Castle, both the medieval iteration of the castle and the older 5th and 6th centuries AD large high-status settlement. The most apparent ruins are those left by Richard, Earl of Cornwall, who built a castle here in about 1230. He chose Tintagel precisely because of its legendary associations with Cornish kings of the old Dumnonia. Tintagel was first linked to King Arthur, and therefore Merlin, by Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century, who wrote that Arthur was magically conceived at Tintagel thanks to some fairly morally dubious trickery wrought by the alleged wizard, in league with Arthur's folkloric father, Uther Pendragon. It was also known in the Middle Ages as King Mark of Cornwall's castle, which featured in the love story of Tristan and Isolde. It was in the Victorian period of Arthurian revivalism that the association was cemented. This was largely down to the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson, who visited the castle, and others who picked up the fantastical tales of this dramatic location as they forged an imperial origin myth for the burgeoning British Empire. On the west side of Haven Beach is the entrance to a tunnel that passes right through the neck of the island. It shows signs of having been widened as a consequence of mining, but it has also been eroded by water and runs through at high tide. Since the late 19th century, it has been known as Merlin's Cave. The large cave on the beach, which was filled with the onrushing tide when I visited, is known as Merlin's Cave because of the famous scene in Tennyson's Idylls of the King. In the first poem, The Coming of Arthur, Tennyson recounts how Merlin plucks the infant Arthur from the sea in the haven below Tintagel Castle. When Uther in Tintagel passed away, moaning and wailing for an heir, the two dropped to the cove and watched the great sea fall, wave after wave, each mightier than the last, till last a ninth one, gathering half the deep and full of voices, slowly rose and plunged, roaring, and all the wave was in a flame, and down the wave and in the flame was born a naked babe, and rode to Merlin's feet, who stooped and caught the babe and cried, "The king, here is an heir for Uther." Because of his spellbinding reputation and the continued accumulation and syncretism of tales to his legend, there are plenty of places associated with the so-called wizard. In one mythical story, he was said to have ordered giants to build Stonehenge, although this cannot be true since the Neolithic stone circle is vastly older than the alleged age of Arthur. The story does, however, potentially highlight a thin thread of the shamanic beliefs of those that did construct the monument to the possible real nature of Merlin as a druid. That's not to say that Druidism and shamanism are the same thing, but there is a connective tissue, especially in the pragmatic and ritual adherence to nature's cycles, and, in particular, the reverence for sacred springs and wells. The most likely location for the real Merlin, if it were possible to isolate such a character from the legend, would be far to the north of Tintagel. The figure of Merlin can be seen as being based on Myrdin Wilt, or Myrdin the Wild. Pre-12th century Welsh poems portrayed Myrdin as a madman who dwelt in the Caledonian forest, placing him in what is now Scotland. One of King Arthur's famous 12 battles was, according to the 9th century Welsh monk Nennius, called Cat Coit Celidon. The Caledonian forest takes its name from the Romans, who called Scotland Caledonia. In one story, Merlin is strongly linked with the area around modern-day Glasgow in Strathclyde, which was the Brittonic kingdom of Alt-Clwyd. It tells of Merlin or Myrdin's hermit-like existence in the wilderness as a result of what we might now call post-traumatic stress disorder, where he struggled to come to terms with a brutal battle. This conflict has been suggested to have been the Battle of Afterith, where the king of Alt-Clwyd inflicted a crushing defeat on the forces of Gwenddolo. Myrdin was said to have been driven mad after witnessing the slaughter, which, according to the Annals of Wales, took place in the year 573 AD. This tale is repeated in the Vita Merlini, or Life of Merlin, strongly thought to have been penned by Geoffrey of Monmouth in around 1150. Merlin, or Merlinus as he is rendered in Latin, was described as something of a prophet. This tallies with the suggestions of some authors who have theorised that he may have been a druid. The idea of him being a bard is, according to some, a euphemistic allusion to his knowledge of oral history and ritual, allegedly consistent with pagan druidic practices. The Vita Merlini tells how Merlin was involved in a battle alongside Peredur, the king of Gwynedd, and Rhydderch, the king of the Cumbrians, in conflict with Gwenddolo, a Scottish king. Merlin's side was victorious, but the battle took a heavy mental toll on him, as 3 brothers of Peridor died in the fighting. Merlin, consumed by grief, went mad and fled to the Caledonian forest, where he subsisted on grass and fruit. After a brief return to civilization, Merlin ends up back in nature, where he is described as riding a stag, talking of King Arthur and issuing prophecies. It is important to note too that Merlin has been compared to the Irish Sibney and Scottish Leilachan, who had similar tales told about them. This alludes to them being either regional variations of an older archetype or retellings of the same story by different peoples. So, to cut a long story short, it is unlikely that Merlin ever dwelt in the Cornish cave at Tintagel that bears his name. Whatever the perhaps disappointing truth, it does not detract from the dramatic and beautifully rugged location, however. That's it for this video. Don't forget to like, share, and most importantly subscribe. And you can also support the channel on Subscribestar via the link in the description. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.